Take appropriate safety precautions before beginning installation. And we recommend a minimum of 2 people to install. So, if possible, please ensure you have another pair of hands available to help. Prior to any welding, a 240 volt welding set, a hand grinder, and we also recommend using these tools. Do the goalpost frame and mark the width on the container. Choose 2 points slightly in from where you have marked the edges of the frame and grind the paint off. This will allow for a clean weld when attaching the support plates. Next, weld the support plates onto the container and position the frame. Draw a chalk line around the perimeter, keeping the aperture size as small as possible, leaving no more than a 2mm gap around the frame. Once this is complete, remove the frame and the support plates. This can be done by tapping them off with a mallet. Once you are happy with your aperture, you can then cut your hole with a hand grinder, taking the appropriate safety precautions. As you are coming to the end of cutting your aperture, we recommend someone supporting the loose sheet of metal, so it can be pushed to fall away from you once complete, and tidying up any rough edges. Once your aperture is cut, you can then position your frame ready to be welded into place. Use tack welds to hold the frame in position for welding. Weld the frame into the aperture using the following measurements: a full weld across the top of the frame, a 100mm weld down each side, and a 25 to 30mm long stitch weld every 250 to 300mm for the remainder. Once this is done, dress any cuts in the corrugation if needed. At this point, the support bar for the frame is no longer required and can be removed, and any rough edges smoothed off. You can then remove all weld spatter and swarf from the base, ready to install the door. Once the frame is installed, you can then weld in the door sill. Position the sill between the goalposts, underneath where the door will sit, and weld into position. To fit your door, position in the goalpost frame, on top of the sill, and use tack welds to hold the door in place. Using the spindle and handle, open the door to at least 90 degrees by using the handle to retract the latch. Using Tek screws to fit the door, drill pilot holes through the fixing points to start with, and then screw them in, beginning with the hinge side and then moving on to the latching side. When your door is fixed into position, close the door and test the locking mechanism is working smoothly by turning the key 2 full rotations, and adjust the fixings at this stage if required. Once the door is in place, you can then fit the rain deflector above the door. To fit, position at the top edge of the goalpost frame and mark the fixing holes. Pre-drill pilot holes for the rivet to fit into, and then using a riveter, fix into place. To finish joining the line between the frame and container, paint over it using a roller or paintbrush. To fit the handle, check that you have all of the following components: cylinder covers and screws, 2 gaskets, 1 internal handle, 1 external handle, 2 thread extensions, 2 screws, and 1 spindle. Place the external handle and gasket into place. Fit the spindle through the door, loosening the handle grub screw if required. Position the internal handle and gasket lining up with the spindle and privacy lock, and screw the handles together. Next, install the thumb turn cylinder, rotating the cam to a central position, and fit the cylinder screw through the sash lock and test the locking mechanism. Test the key in the cylinder to ensure it locks, and tighten up the grub screws on the handles. You can then close the door and check the locking system engages correctly. Finally, fit the V-seal to the top and sides of the door frame, with the V pointing away from you. Moving on to fit the window shutter, the installation process is very similar. First, mark where you are going to fit your window shutter and grind off 2 points directly underneath where you can fit the support plates. Attach the support plates vertically using tack welds and position the window shutter frame where it will be fitted. Next, draw a chalk line around the frame, keeping the aperture size as small as possible, leaving no more than a 2mm gap around the frame. When complete, you can remove the frame and the support plates. With the aperture drawn, you can then cut your hole with a hand grinder, taking the appropriate safety precautions. We recommend someone supporting the loose sheet of metal so it can be pushed to fall away from you once the aperture is cut, and tidying up any rough edges. Once your aperture is cut, you can then position your frame ready to be welded into place. Use tack welds at the corners to hold it in position. You can then weld the frame into the aperture using the following measurements: a full weld across the top of the frame, a 100mm weld down each side, and a 25 to 30mm long stitch weld every 250 to 300mm for the remainder. Once this is done, dress any cuts in the corrugation if needed. To install your window shutter, remove the leaves and position the frame in the opening. You can weld it into place at the corners. Now that your window shutter is fitted, you can now fit the glazing unit. To install, simply slide into the aperture and locate correctly. When in position, find the screw holes and drilling pilot holes first. Use pop rivets to fix the unit to the shutter. You can also use self-drilling screws if you prefer. You can now put the shutter door leaves back on their hinges. To finish joining the line between the frame and container, paint over it using a roller or paintbrush. Once all the paint has dried, you can then fully seal the door and window frames using an industrial silicone sealant. Your container is now ready for painting or cladding to finish.